who has been with the University of the Free State Libraries since 2003. She started as an information librarian for natural agriculture and science, and then later became a system librarian in 2005. And from there, her career involved to setting up the Digital Scholarship Center. She is currently managing at the University of the Free State. She holds an MPhil from the University of Cape Town in digital curation with research data management as a specialist. So today she'll be taking us through that. Immediately after her, Dr. Liliot will join and do his presentation. And then once the two of them are done, we will then open the floor for questions. Cornell, if you are ready, over to you. Cornell, are you able to take over now?
Good morning, afternoon.
Good afternoon. We can hear you loud and clear. You may take over now.
Great. Sorry, I had to log in with my husband's gaming computer, so a lot more on and offs than I anticipated. But thank you, yes, for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about research data management and librarianship. In my experience, the possibilities for support in the digital research environment by libraries do appear to be endless at this point. So just when I think I've seen the limit to requests for assistance at the Digital Scholarship Center, as you said, that I'm managing now, and that's opened last year, then I get a query that I would never have thought would need our help. And while in this presentation we will look at the different stages in research data management and where we might fit in terms of support, what I have found is that our biggest role is not necessarily to know research data management inside out, but to know when to focus a researcher's attention on the need and importance of RDM as part of their scientific process. You've probably seen it a million times, but they do say that it's just good science, good practice for all the benefits that exist and are important to researchers and research institutions. You know, things like trustworthiness in research, transparency, increased visibility of research output, and increased impact. So yeah, the thing is that the internet and digital environments have created a research environment that allows for so much more in terms of creating and sharing and collaborating, just enriching research. Unfortunately, it also allows for questionable practices like predatory publishing and fake science. Not that they didn't exist before, but maybe making it easier. And I think that's why it's so important that our researchers need to understand that RDM is an invaluable tool that will help them avoid ruining their reputations, that of their institutions, and just by giving them, you know, or avoiding that by giving them the necessary, almost want to say, evidence, should their work be questioned. Now, you can all read up on the nitty-gritty of RDM, so I won't be going into too much detail about what it actually is. The Digital Curation Center, which you might have heard of, a lot recommends that you read the UK Data Archive's guide for researchers on best practices for managing and sharing data, to get a good idea about what RDM is. Maybe you've read this already, but if you take a look at the table of contents that I included on this slide, it already gives you a good idea about managing and sharing data just from the headings. And maybe you can already see, potential roles for librarians or where you can fit in. In fact, I mean, we're here today to talk about librarians' role in RDM, and I can talk from my experience, but it's limited to my institution and the researchers that I've assisted so far. So maybe as we go along, you can use the chat box and just put in, what do you actually want to find out today? So maybe it gets answered during the presentation, but maybe not. I just think it's important that we find out today, or we find out what you want to know, so that, because that's going to help define our roles or potential roles. But okay, if you are a complete novice to RDM, you might want to know what it is. And usually when we do training with researchers, we start by taking a look at research data, since that is what the title says, you're managing your research data. And the reason being that, there are so many types of research data in the various disciplines, and they're diverse. And a researcher might not think of a particular item that they produced during their data collection as research data, but it could be an important part of their data set, or that supports their data and helps support their research output. And as you can see here, we include both analog and digital materials in research data, where your digital data can be born digital, digitized. An example of a born digital data set could be maybe an Excel file with data collected through an online tool like Eversys or RateCap. And an example of a digitized data set could maybe be paper interviews that have been scanned and converted in some way. I know Eversys has a product called Eversys Scan Station, where if you have the paper copies, you can scan and convert that. And then we also take a look at data types. I think pretty much any resource telling you more about RDM will probably have a list of data types. And as you can see, it covers a wide variety of data. I think if you're interested in learning more about a specific data type, say, for example, you have a researcher using audio recordings, then I'd recommend looking at best practices from other studies or in recommendations on digital preservation. So in this documentation and the Digital Curation Center documentations, you'll find quite a lot of links and references to best practices in the different data types. By recommending research data management and also specifically data management planning, which we'll get to in a minute, for your researchers, it becomes easier to make data type and data collection equipment recommendations when they're still at the start of their project, rather than trying to help with more complicated file conversions or getting hold of equipment to digitize audio interviews. So one of the main things about supporting RDM is to emphasize the importance of doing it right from the start, to make it as effective as possible. And then, okay, you have an idea of what the research data is, and the management of the research data then is the active management and appraisal of data over the life cycle of scholarly and scientific interest. And that means that, as I said, even before data collection starts, the researcher needs to plan how they will do it, with which tools or equipment, where they will store it, how they will organize their data. And that includes things like, what's your file naming convention? How are you going to organize your folders containing your data? It also includes the documentation that they will keep and the metadata they will add during this whole process. The documentation will, of course, assist anyone, say, on the research project itself to understand the organization of the data, if you've got a big team, or the file naming convention. And it can also help anyone in the future who would like to, say, replicate the research, to know exactly what was done, when and why. So a future user would find it helpful to know how to run a program that was written for data collection. And the more information that explains the process, the better for future users. But not only for them, also for the researcher. If they have to report back to a funder, for example, then they don't have to scramble to get information, then they already have that. And RDM also means that the researcher and the research institution look at how to store and preserve data. Even though I think a lot of the responsibilities for RDM will be with the researcher, the institution also has a part to play. So today we're looking specifically at support roles for libraries, but the wider institution needs certain things in place to allow researchers to properly manage their research data. So you're looking at a policy and guidance documents on how to manage research data in the institutional context. Does the institution have storage space for its research data? What about active research data? What about the long-term preservation needs of their research data? Platforms for sharing, collaborating with other researchers. So I'll share a link to our RDM policy, but there are so many examples out there to give you an idea of what institutions need to have in place for successful research data management. And then to make planning for managing research data easier, you get what is called, what I mentioned, your data management plans, or DMPs. And this is a very nice tool to help a researcher think through all the different phases in the research data cycle. Funders usually have a template that a researcher can use to make sure they comply with all of their specific requirements. But you also get generic data management plans that you can use if you don't have a funder or maybe anything specific to comply with. But I would like to repeat what I said earlier, and that's that it's just good research practice. So even if you don't have a funder or certain requirements, it is good to have a data management plan. I think a research project isn't always predictable. So having to go back and try and figure out what you did 2 months ago, sometimes longer, I think is stressful at the best of times. So, also the risk of having to repeat data collection or experiments could turn into a disaster for a research project. And the DMPs as well is a good place for librarians to maybe have a peek and see what they can support as well, or where they can support. Okay, so what I want us to look at now is some RDM activities. So these activities that I've got listed here comes from the linked resources in the first slide. So there might be some missing, or yeah, it's just a few examples that I thought we could look at. just see maybe, where we can fit in. And as I said, I'm speaking from my own experience in our institution, so it might be very different somewhere else, or you might recognize some places where your library can play a supporting role. And what I also just want to reiterate is that each of these activities should be supported by the institution. It can't be the responsibility of the researcher on their own, and it cannot be the responsibility of just one support division. There are so many different areas of expertise, and that can be found across the divisions at the institution. But okay, let's start at the top. So for authentication, in other words, who should have access to the research data? Now, obviously, this is a decision made by the researcher, the project, but then they will need a platform on which to share their data with the correct people. So let's say that the library takes responsibility to identify a platform, a repository, because we have experience with repositories mostly, but you'll also need ICT to help set it up, make sure that everything is safe and secure within the institutional network, for example. But that's one way for the library to help support RDM, is to collaborate, to set up that platform, to share research data and to collaborate. If you take copyright, for example, well, okay, you can see where the library can play a role here. We usually help our patrons determine if they can use someone else's work in their own work. So I think the same applies to research data. Or maybe just to help answer questions on ownership of research data at the institution, which would, that's where a policy comes in handy. So, using your expertise in copyright and getting involved in the policy development for research data management. Current awareness around the research data landscape. I would say that depending on the division at the institution that's taking the biggest role in supporting RDM, they would probably be the primary vehicle through which all of this is communicated. But again, there are various areas of expertise between the library, your ICT services, your research offices, and all of that will contribute to creating awareness and keeping up to date. And this may also vary between institutions. In one, the research office might be the responsible division for the policy, for example, and in another, the library. So it depends, but definitely a collaborative effort across those areas of expertise at the institution. Data citation, again, the library seems to be an easy, could find an easy place there for support. But let's say your institution decides on a specific citation method, then I'm sure there need to be consultation with stakeholders, from the library, could advise on best practice, maybe ICT as well, what can your platform include, academics in different research areas. So again, a rather collaborative effort, but a library definitely has a support role there, especially in terms of advice on best practice. Same with data information literacy. And the libraries do seem to be the place to go for information literacy. But I can maybe just use an example that we have. At UFS, there's an institution-wide digitalization plan, and digital literacy programs are really high up on this plan. So we are looking at the moment at current initiatives and then a way forward. And also what will be included in digital literacy and at what level, where does data literacy fit in? But now in our case, the Center for Teaching and Learning are the owners of this specific project. So you can see that a division that would normally not be involved in research support is now one of the stakeholders that you need to take into account. Data migration. So this one is quite easy for me. At our institution, our ICT services high performance computing unit is extremely helpful here. They help us with guidance for researchers, and they also help out with actual migrations if needed. But if a researcher gets to us on this, asks our assistance, sometimes with something basic we can help or show them how to do it. But we do have a lot of support from our ICT services here. And the same with data storage. So we work closely with the high performance computing unit to put infrastructure in place. And we also have the Interdisciplinary Center for Digital Futures. And they're a great platform for determining the needs of our researchers, our current researchers, based on their actual needs, rather than working on, guesswork and best estimates. So it's extremely valuable to work with the researchers who have diverse projects, many different data formats in one project, active data that they need to be able to share with people. It's a very nice collaboration to have. Digital preservation. Well, libraries know this, right? I don't know how much, how hands-on the whole community has been in the digital environment. But the same principles apply though. If a library, for instance, does not have the capacity to make recommendations for the best digital formats or platforms or storage for digital preservation, then I think consulting with your ICT division is a good idea. But as with anything that you work with ICT, but specifically I know in digital preservation, it becomes important to be clear on the different languages used by libraries and IT, say, in terms of preservation. So, kind of don't assume that they will know exactly what you're talking about, because the terminology might be the same, but they might refer to something else than the library. Intellectual property, commercialization. At UFS, it's managed by our research office. So when it comes to advice, we refer our researchers to them. You could probably start to see that we're the first port of call when it comes to research data management support. Our library took responsibility for the policy and for hosting the data repository. We also took responsibility for creating guides and providing training. But we don't even start to pretend to know everything. So what we work really hard at is to foster our relationships with the experts at our institution, but trying to provide our researchers with the ease of only having to ask once, and translating these requests to, for example, ICT or the research office, just to make it easier for them to get what they need. Just a few more examples: licensing, and this links to copyright. So one of those skills that patrons usually expect from the library. But here you could have decisions made at an institutional level too. Maybe a recommended license for research data. So research office and academics might need to be a part of these discussions. Metadata and documentation is definitely very recognizable as a library supporting role. And that's what we're good at, right? Also part of preservation and making information available for a wider audience. I think we know this. So though you might still need to think about subject-specific metadata needed for specific research projects, maybe how to accommodate that in a data repository. So, you might need help from IT or service provider on that. Same with repository management. Depending on who takes responsibility for the platform, you will need consultation throughout the institution with the setup and management. I'm thinking workflows and quality management, and so on. Then research costing might be mostly the work of the researcher, but they need to be reminded that research data management should also be included. Where are they required to store their data, share it, or publish it? Will that be free of charge? Does institutional storage cost anything? Do they need an external drive, for example, as another source for backups if they're working in the field most of the time? Cloud services, data collection equipment. So, creating that awareness with them and all the different possibilities is definitely a supporting role. Publication of data. Well, again, libraries have their fingers on the pulse of good publication practice. And I think this includes data publication as well. So just as we help authors to publish in the best journals for their careers and for the institution's reputation, I think we can help them identify ways to publish their research data too. And, with research data as a research output, we could certainly help our research officers in motivating for recognition of research data publication and maybe even recognition of RDM for our researchers. I've also mentioned the policy a few times. So as you can see by now, all stakeholders need to be involved in RDM. Again, with us, the library took responsibility for the policy. It is based on UCT's RDM policy that we used with their consent. The library, the research office, and ICTS then had a joint task team who wrote the first draft. We then had a consultation process with faculty and other divisions at the institution, and then going through the necessary approvals. Because we had a policy to work from, I think the process went a lot quicker than most other policies, but it can still take many months and sometimes years for policies to get approved, which I'm sure you know. Funder information, funder compliance. Again, at our institution, the research office assists researchers with their funding requirements and funder applications. Once the researcher's application has been approved, then the research office will direct them to the library to assist with their data management plans if this is a requirement. We also created guides specific to regular funders for UFS researchers to make it easy for them to know the requirements. But again, a collaborative effort there. And another role I think that the library can play is as part of research and ethics committees, where we do not have the expertise to help decide the outcome of the applications for the studies, but we can play an advisory role and create awareness on RDM and its role in ethics and governance. For example, at the moment, we're helping our Health Sciences Research and Ethics Committee to update their documentation. And already they're incorporating workflows that include the library and IT and the research office to better enable the researchers to comply with legislation and adhere to best practices, say by using the recommended and supported software and platforms at the UFS, for example. So definitely a big supporting role. So I think the thing is that, as libraries, we support research and we support collections and we support the reuse of content and the preservation of content. So pretty much within all of that, we can support research data management because by managing your research data well, you can do all of that. Here are a few roles, some that we've mentioned already, but some other ones as well. For example, I spoke about our collaboration with our Center for Teaching and Learning with the digital literacy programs. So by being involved there and reminding them to include data literacy, already you're bringing data into the undergraduate environment. Creating awareness, as I said, that's something that we try to do continuously every chance we get, mentioning research data management and our data repository and so on. Signposting who in the institution to consult is a big role as well. Yes, so definitely quite a few roles that the library can play, and as I said, in each institution that might vary. So I just thought I'd give you one example of, I spoke earlier about the requests we get at the Digital Scholarship Centre and how we try and incorporate RDM into, every possible request, basically, where we can create awareness and encourage researchers to care for their data. I received this email from a researcher at Plant Sciences, and they had images taken from their microscope that needed to be stacked and then edited to be used for the cover of this journal. So the biggest problem was getting an image file of high quality within a reasonable size for the journal publication. So we're able to help, but then a conversation ensued with the researchers about scientific communication of their research output, and naturally then the storage and preservation of their image files. One of the researchers is also an artist and donated his digital collection to the library some years ago. But he joined the conversation to talk about research data in the arts, which in turn led to similarities with other researcher needs that we'd identified in the last few months, and then a collaborative project for a platform for digital collections. So having these conversations with a variety of researchers by just reminding them, remember about good research data management, remember about our repository, remember this is how you can share, this is how you can prepare. And by also always mentioning our RDM support and services, has led to a solution that's suitable for the wider research community and supported by them too. So it just makes it easier to motivate and get certain infrastructure in place as well, rather than just trying to do it on your own and not succeeding. So yes, I hope I'm still in time. I'm just going to stop sharing so I can see any comments.
Okay. The comments or questions, can we maybe kindly hold them for now? And then
Yes,
we
sure.
have the next speaker. After the next speaker, we will then put together all the questions. I've noted a couple of questions. That's where are in the chat. At the end of the second speaker, all the questions will be answered. Just to check, Cornel, are you done with your presentation?
Yes, thank you for the time.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. It's a nice introduction. Just give a little bit of background on RDM. So our next speaker, who will be speaking on open educational resources, he has already joined us here. It's Dr. Liliot from SAID, which is an organization which in Africa is the one that is responsible with managing open educational resources. He holds a PhD from the University of Witwatersrand, and the title of his thesis is Learning About Astronomy, a case study exploring how grade 7 and 8 experience sites of informal learning in South Africa. He also holds a master's degree in zoology from the University of Durham, and he is currently a program specialist for SAID, which is more focused on teacher education. And he has also previously worked at the University of Witwatersrand as a lecturer in the Vet School of Education. That was between 2007 and 2013. And he has quite a lot of accomplishment, mainly because of time. I will not read out everything, so I will then just hand over to Dr. Elliott to talk to us about open educational resources when it's done. And then we will have questions. Thank you. Over to you, Doctor.
Greetings. Thanks very much. I will try and share my screen, if that will work. Okay, so I think you can see this screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, I'm trying to put it onto slideshow. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. Yes, I work at Sadie. I've been there 5 years. And one of the areas I'm in is OER Africa. And so today I'm talking about open education resources. I expect that some of you know quite a bit about them and some of you may not know so much. So I'm doing it really from scratch. And then I'm happy to answer questions at the end. So really, what are they all about? One of the problems is that resources are usually in short supply, good learning resources, and therefore it's always useful to have good ones, and that they can be accessible for students and lecturers. When they are accessible, existing resources can be expensive. For example, textbooks. Later on today, I'm talking in a panel about open textbooks for the Singapore Malala conference, which is organized also by Sadie. It's often difficult to find just one resource that meets everybody's needs. So the idea of open educational resources is to make openly licensed resources available for all. So I'm just going to very quickly go through the absolute basics of what an OER is. So here is an image, a photograph, and this, you could regard this as a resource. It's a resource of some sort. You could use it for teaching and learning. You could put it into a presentation or something like that, and you could use it for teaching and learning. It's an educational resource when you start actually using it for teaching and learning. So here you would show them the image, and then you ask them some questions about it. You're actually creating a learning activity. And I'm not going to ask you to answer these questions, you'll be glad to hear. And then if you take that learning activity, as in the previous slide, and you apply an open license, you are creating an open educational resource. And that's as simple as it is. I mean, the very basics of OER is that it's a resource of some sort. Here I showed you an image, but the reality is it could be a book, it could be a worksheet, it could be a module for teaching, various options. And once you apply an open license, and you don't have to apply to anybody to do that, you can just put the open license on yourself, and I'll talk a little bit about those as we go on. Now, one of the good things about OER, though, is that we can revise them. The whole point of them being open is that you can change them if you want. So in this case, I've, as you can see, I've cut out one part of the image, And now I'm actually doing a slightly different learning activity. So maybe I didn't really want that picture of a dinosaur. So maybe I could get that image from somewhere, and then I could cut some of it out and then use it. And I can do that without asking anybody's permission because it's an OER. Here is a classic example of an image. I did download this from the internet. Now, how do I know it's an OER? Well, I actually searched for images around law on that are OER, but then on the same page that I found this are all the details that show that this is an openly licensed image. And the details here tell you all the aspects of it, where it comes from, etc., who created it. But notice in the middle there, it has a Creative Commons license, and therefore it is freely available for people to use. Okay, so having shown you what an OER is, official definition is obviously a little bit more complicated. It's they are teaching and learning resources, and they're also research resources. It can be. They're either in the public domain. Now, if they're in the public domain, as we'll see later on, you don't even need to attribute them. However, most people want attribution. So if they're not in the public domain, they are released under an intellectual property license that permits these things. Their free use and their repurposing by others. So you can imagine a lecturer that you are working with finds an openly licensed module on the teaching of chemistry, let's say organic chemistry. Now, depending on its license, that lecturer can then take that teaching module and make changes to it, and then use it for their own teaching without asking anybody's permission, because it has the license. As long as they attribute, in this case. Okay, so what are they? They're courses, they're images, like I showed you earlier, course materials, modules, textbooks, streaming videos. There are a whole load of streaming videos on YouTube that are openly licensed, tests, software, other tools, materials, etc., etc. All of these sorts of things, as long as they have been given an open license. And these people, the Hewlett Foundation, who have given this definitions, they strongly support the use of OER internationally. We actually get our funding, much of our funding for OER Africa comes from the Hewlett Foundation in the USA. Okay, so how do these actually relate to copyright? You know that what copyright is. As librarians, you will know what copyright is. It gives the owner of a work the right to say how other people can use it. So I create that image that I showed you at the beginning. I can say copyright Tony Lelliot. And then in addition, if I don't mind other people using it for teaching and learning purposes, I can then openly license it. The copyright still stays with me, but my license, or the license that I give it, will encourage people to attribute me as the original taker of the photograph, producer of the resource. So the whole point of copyright then is obviously to protect people from being recopied without their permission. Okay, so that's what copyright is. And all that the idea of openly licensing is to add on to the original copyright. So it's in a way, it's a flexible form of copyright. And it doesn't give away the copyright. Still, whoever created it can hold that copyright, unless they want to put it in the public domain. So therefore, a resource can be copyright and be openly licensed. And we say CC because the commonest, as we'll see in a minute, the commonest open license is produced by Creative Commons. Okay, so they used this symbol. There are some others. There's one called copyleft. Little joke on copyright. So copyleft is another system, but the most common one is this one. And they have produced this rather bewildering, if you're not familiar with these, a rather bewildering set of licenses. And but don't worry too much about them. Today we don't really have the time to go into them, but I will explain very briefly what each one is about. I don't think I put it on the next one. No, I don't. By means just who is it by, literally. And that is the most open form of open license. All you need to do is attribute the author. And you can do anything with it. You can change it. You can repackage it. You can sell it even for money if you want to, etc., etc. You can do all sorts of things with it. Notice the next one down has some $ crossed out. This means non-commercial. So you can do the same things as with this one, but you cannot make money from it. So an author of a work can decide to release theirs as CC by NC. In other words, they don't mind other people using it, but they don't want them to make money from it. The third one is not very open because ND stands for no derivatives. In other words, you can't change the original resource. And I can quickly go through the other ones. SA is nothing to do with South Africa. It means share alike. If you do use it and change an original one, this one says you need to share with the original license. And then the remaining ones are just combinations of those ones. So some of these are more open than others, as you can see. These two aren't very open, actually, because of the ND feature on them. In other words, the author doesn't want you to make any changes. You can't adapt them. They're not particularly open, but they're still called OER. They're just less open than the ones at the top. And here we have the full spectrum. I've already mentioned public domain on the left, and that is actually the same as CC0. That means you don't need to attribute the author. You can put that image, or one of your lecturers can put the image they found, which is CC0 or public domain, put it into a document, and they don't even need to attribute the person. But the remaining ones as you go across are by means attribute. All of them will have by because all of them require you to attribute. And then as you get to the right-hand side, they are more and more restrictive until finally all rights reserved means, of course, there is no open license at all on it. Okay, so it's quite important for you and the lecturers you work with to understand that the majority of stuff that they find on the internet are closed. A person might put up a website and say, all my resources are free. But at the bottom of the web page, you will see copyright so-and-so, all rights reserved. And those are actually not to be used by others and incorporated into their own, let's say, course materials or something like that. Now, of course, you librarians will know quite a lot about fair use and those sorts of things. So those things do come into this, but we have to make clear to lecturers that most of the stuff on the internet is actually not openly licensed. So they do have to be accompanied by a specific open license to be an OER. So that's quite important to realize. Okay, so this was really very much an introduction to OER. I'm not going to spend too much more time on it because I would really like to get into questions, because usually people have a number of questions. We at OER Africa mainly work obviously with OER, but we also work with open access publishing. And if you would like to know more about that, that's something I think that's very relevant for librarians, because more and more lecturers are deciding to publish in open access journals. And that's quite important to know about. We also deal to some extent with open courseware. If you go onto the OER Africa website, you will see there's quite a lot of open courseware there. And we also try to advise people on various open educational practices. And we also deal a little bit with other open movements. If you'd like to hear more about these things, we actually publish regularly on openness in communications. And I don't know if I do this link, I'm not sure if you can then, it will take, can you now see the OER Africa website? Would somebody say yes or no?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so this is, here's the website, and if we get there, I'll do that in a moment. These are the various things we release from time to time. So I'm definitely going to put ICTLIG on the list because he's already been in touch with me. But anybody else who would like to be on the list. So here's stuff we've releasing this year: Open Education Week, assessment, this thing called archive, open science. What role do librarians play on the African continent? That when you click there, you'll see African continent, etc., etc. So there's quite a lot relevant to librarians here. And if we click go back to our main website, you will see this is the main website, and that's where I just went to was there. Read more. And I would strongly recommend, if you go to our website, which is very simple, one word, oerafrica.org, O-R-G, to go here where it says Learning Pathways, because here we have a number of online tutorials on OER and related areas of related areas. If you want the Spanish version or the French version, they're there. And then we have one on adapting open content. We have a whole tutorial on publishing using open access, design for learning, which is more relevant for lecturers, communicate research findings openly, and then one on online facilitation. So I've got a number of these here, which I think it would certainly be worth you looking through. And if once you click onto it, it's completely online. Everything is online, explains what it's all about. You start the course, and then you basically work down these, and it tells you all about. So if you want to know more about open licensing, or it's all here. It's all the details, and there's a video to show what open licensing is all about, etc. So just to finish off then, what are the implications of all this for librarians? Well, all of these things are gaining momentum, and it's something that librarians really need to know about. You need to be ahead of the trends. You might need to provide training sessions. You can use our resources for doing that. I'm going to make this PowerPoint available to you as a PowerPoint, not as a PDF. And you can take it and cut it out, cut things and change things for your own context. You need to be able to give guidance to them. And there's a very good US article on open for librarians. It's an American one, but it's still very relevant for you. And finally, UFS has a LibGuide on OER, which many of you will be familiar with. So that, may be your first port of call for UFS people here. Okay, I showed those live, so I'm not going to go on those. Those are two of our learning pathways about open. And we think you should work through them in your own time. It's well worth spending some time saying, right, over the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to work through some of these because they are all self-study. And that's it. This is an OER. So that's basically my session today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lilliot, for that insightful presentation on OER. I know that we were supposed to finish at 1:30, but unfortunately, because of those delay that we had, we will go over a little bit 1:30 so that we are able to take all questions that might be available. I will then open the floor, but first, maybe let me start with the questions that are in the chat. Let's see. Okay. I think the first one from Cecilia, I think it's going to Cornell. She's asking, how does POPIA affect RDM? Cornell?
Thank you, Cecilia. I think, well, okay, first of all, ASAF is busy working on a research code of conduct that will incorporate much of what POPIA expects of researchers. And I've put a link in the chat to our guide on POPIA and researchers as well. And I think if you look at that, then you'll see that it just emphasizes the normal ethical considerations during a study with human participants. So, what we advise our ethics committees at the moment is to include, for example, data management plans in their processes so that it will help researchers think about any POPIA considerations or GDPR considerations or any such regulations. So that so that they're aware of it. But again, I don't think RDM it's good research practice, and good research practice will consider the protection of personal information. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Cornell. Another one from Cecilia. She's saying, if a research article is retracted for whatever reason, how does this affect an institution dealing with the related research data? That's for you, Cornell, again.
Yeah, that's a good question. But I think, well, if you think about publication of research output, then if you're a publisher, then you have a retraction policy or retraction guidelines. So that might definitely be something to consider to add to your RDM policy or your data repository, so that it is very clear what you will do in terms of retraction.
Thank you. And then the next one from Gugu. Yes, the session is being recorded. And then from Teresa, thanks so much for an insightful presentation. It's great and much appreciated. Thanks for sharing your living experience of RDM at the University of the Free State. Okay, let me see. Okay, again from Cecilia, I think this is going to Dr. Lilliot. What about providing resources in indigenous languages?
Okay, I've actually just responded to that. That we encourage that. We are OER Africa, so we deal with most of sub-Saharan Africa, and we have a number of, there are on our OER Africa site, there are a number of resources in different languages. Sadie runs a project for a literacy project, which is called African Storybook. I think it's .org or .com, I can't remember. And I'd have to look it up. But African Storybook, if you just Google African Storybook, those are all openly licensed in multiple languages, lots and lots and lots of languages. Yes, it's stuff. Sorry, it's africanstorybook.org, not .com. That's a mistake I just made. So yes, we do. We encourage that. We also encourage people in countries around elsewhere in Africa to produce into their own languages. And sorry, there was another question from Teresa.
She's another one is related to, do you know how possible is it to publish on open access when initially went via a journal behind the paywall? What is the best way of sharing an output that is currently in a paid for journal?
If it's already been published, that okay. If it's already been published in a behind the paywall journal, there are a couple of ways of doing it. If you look in our in that learning pathway I showed you, publish open access, we describe ways of doing that. There's green open access and gold open access. And in green open access, most publishers don't mind a pre-publication copy or even a post-publication copy of the article being put in somewhere like ResearchGate. So they that is an important, you can do that. I mean, what happens these days is that most people who have published, they're very happy just to share a PDF with other people. But if you want to like publicize it, I would suggest you put it on somewhere like a ResearchGate or a similar sort of platform. You can do that. You're not meant to give the exact version that was produced in the journal, but you can give a preprint version, literally the one before before the proofs were finalized.
Thank you, Dr. Elliott, for that response. And then let me see, there is another one from Pumeza. Very interesting open textbooks for students which repository or platform can be used to make them available. Over to you, Dr. Elliott. That question.
Yeah. Pumeza's asked the question and then later on, Cecilia has made a comment in a way about it. You're quite right that they are very first world centered, and that's in fact something where I'm going to be talking about in the conference this afternoon. I'm afraid I don't know if you can access that conference because you need it's the third day of it and you need to have registered and all that stuff. But they are open textbooks are only just taking off in I would say in Africa. University of Cape Town has some good open textbooks they have a whole open textbook project. Otherwise, you have to take an existing one and then make changes to it to suit your context. And Cecilia is quite correct. They're very, very first world centered. So I think it's actually more useful to produce to produce courseware which has a learning component in it rather than pure textbooks, because they are quite cumbersome to create. And I would say build up OER into a sort of module and then have some teaching side to it, rather than jumping straight to an open textbook, because we don't have many that are particularly relevant for our context. You go and take one from USA, and then you would have to make quite a lot of changes to its images and some of its language and stuff to make it relevant. But I think they will take off as time goes on, because textbooks are getting more and more expensive. And I think there will be more projects that try to help academics develop open textbooks for our context.
Thank you, Dr. Elliott, for that response. It's just a question from me to both speakers. In terms of, let's say, any university adopt RDM or they adopt OER, do they necessarily need a specialist that will focus on these things to make sure that they take off or they are properly managed? That's a question for both speakers. Maybe Cornell can answer first and then Dr. Elliott.
I'm sorry, Sihle, can you maybe just repeat the question?
The question is, for example, if any of the universities, maybe in South Africa or in Africa, they interested maybe in adopting RDM, do they need to have somebody, an employee who is a specialist who only focuses on that?
It would be nice. I don't know how realistic that is. We didn't, for example. So we kind of just developed our capacity, studied further, went for training courses, just kind of started doing it as part of our other responsibilities, which we still do. But the more it's easier to motivate to get somebody dedicated to it when you can start showing, the benefits. And well, Popia is actually one of the reasons why we get more queries. So the moment that your community realizes they do need quite a lot more support, then it's easier then to motivate for just one person. But yeah, I don't know if many institutions in South Africa, in any case, has that capacity.
Thank you. Dr. Elliott, on your side?
Lelliot. Research, I don't know much about research data management. So I don't know if I can really respond to that one. If you're talking about OER, I mean, that really is, it's many institutions are taking this on as an area of that they would like to work in. And I know that UFS is, because I can see your LibGuide, and there are some, I think there are some small projects around it and stuff. So, so I think that it will grow, continue to grow, and it's in some, you might want to get external funding for it. I'm not sure you could actually maybe look at potential funders for that sort of thing, but that one quite important thing is to get lecturers on board, and many lecturers need quite a lot of persuading, because they seem to think that their course is absolutely brilliant, and they want to hold on to it, whereas the reality is their research might be, that's what really makes them in a way well known. Any coursework they produce is actually similar to everybody else's coursework. So really, we regard that courseware, all courseware should be open, and you can actually access lots and lots of courseware all over from many countries around the world. Okay.
There is a question from Kecho, and then after Kecho, I will open the floor if there is anyone that would like to ask a question. The question from Kecho, she's saying, does OER Africa provide hands-on training when needed to lecturers and teachers?
Well, we're looking into that. I mean, we do, but we tend to do it with universities that we have already made partnerships with. And because we work all across Africa, and our funding requires us to work across Africa, not just in South Africa, we are actually just about to start a new grant, and we are going to be, we're going to probably make some links with some institutions. So the short answer to your question is, if you contact us, we might be able to assist, but I can't actually promise. We don't have enough capacity to obviously just run workshops everywhere all the time. But we do, the idea behind this is Liasa asking us to do it is great because we can get to quite a large number of people. But my email address is in the chat if anyone would like to email me about anything to do with OER.
Thank you, Dr. Lesliot. I will open the floor. If anyone has a question, you may raise your hand. And there is a comment from Cornell, I think for both lecturers and OER and researchers on RDM, getting recognition goes some way to getting them started or interesting. Do we have any question? Anyone a comment or question? The floor is yours. Okay, in the absence of any question, I will then hand over to my colleague, Khadi, who will give us a vote of thanks, and then we are done for today's session. The session is being recorded. If you'd like to have a recording, you most likely will have it. And also the two presenters will make available the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation, which they use today if you do need them. Khadi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sihle. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you. My role here is to thank the presenters that were here today. What a wonderful session that we had today on RDM and also on OER. Thank you so much, Cornell, for educating us on best practices for RDM. What I've learned also, the examples, data management plans, the RDM activities regarding copyright, and also the life cycle of RDM. But regarding what librarians' role that we need to play, it's creating awareness for researchers to adhere to the best practices of RDM. So thank you so much, Cornell, for an informative session that you gave to us this afternoon. Dr. Lilliot, thank you for a very informative session on OER. OER in general, it gives a wide variety to materials for teaching. And what I've noticed is that students complain a lot that books are expensive. There are a lot of things that they need to pay for. So I think OER provides affordable material for students, allows faculty to enhance their own work. So I think OER on its own, the way you just presented it to us, it gives, I think, the more unprivileged people to have access to a lot of resources that previously they couldn't have access to. So thank you so much for the presentation that you did provide for us today, and we'll definitely keep in touch if there's anything that we need to find out from you. Thank you, Sihle, for coordinating and introducing the presenters. And thank you for the audience, the participation, the questions. We thank you so much for today and have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.